Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today for our very first virtual REV Talk. It was really quite sad for me to have stopped hosting these at Soho House, as it's really my belief that we all benefit from community and knowledge sharing has never been more important. So I wanted to start this event series again digitally, whilst we can keep everybody safe and still have some incredible conversations. So today I'm really thrilled to welcome back two incredibly inspiring people who I've had on the podcast, but whose work together I think really shines when they're in a joint session. Alexander and Johanna come from two very different backgrounds, but they've come together to start Carbon Times Regeneration, which is a masterclass on understanding our carbon footprints and what we can do to really improve them as individuals and as businesses. Today, we're going to be talking about the urgent need for progress, not perfection, when it comes to sustainability, and how we can all really hold ourselves and companies accountable whilst being proactive and hopeful about the future. I know it's a trying time for all of us, but Johanna, Alexander, and I all really come together in this belief that the power of positivity is so important. And so today's conversation ultimately really revolves around that. So anyways, I'm going to welcome our guest now, and I'm so excited to bring this talk to you all, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, hi guys. So I'm so excited that we are getting to do this, even though it's digital and I wish it was in person, but c'est la vie. So I'd like to ask you both, first of all, Alexander, we can start with you. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about, how you came into working on, like the climate and working with carbon in particular?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, it's really nice to be here. It would be fun to do this in person. So I'm Alexander. I founded Carbon Calories recently. About 2 years ago, I started it in earnest, but I've been ideating it for 5 years and going through some accelerators next year. So I'm excited to take it to the next step. But I got into carbon emissions accounting about 10 years ago. I started work at a company that builds LEED certified buildings, a real estate developer. They were the one of the first companies to ever build LEED certified buildings. I think the standard was based on one of their buildings in '99. And so for them, I was doing real estate finance, but what I really wanted to know was what's my impact and how do I understand climate change in the context of the carbon emissions that are causing it. And I thought that, we really have to understand carbon emissions if we want to talk about climate change realistically, or just in order to actually mitigate it. And so I started doing carbon accounting, self-taught. I reached out to James E. Hansen. He led me down a path to some material. And so been building tools since then, lifestyle calculators, wikicarbon.org, growth models for the planet, and then now I hit upon carbon calories. And so that's how the journey sort of started for me. But I think it started in the forest in Denmark, where I sort of like appreciated nature in a way that was really special. So that's, I guess, where it started for me at the very beginning. But yeah.
Amazing. And Johanna, what about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey into this.
Well, I have a platform called Detox Life. Basically, before that, I was a yoga teacher for 15 years. That was like my sole profession. And then before that, I was working in the fashion industry. So I think somewhere along the line, I just wanted to channel all, my professions that I've done and use the platforms I have to create an alternative way to, address sustainability, climate change, to educate people, spiritually. And I hopefully it will not be an alternative way. My mission is to make it the norm. So that's basically my professional life. But just like Alexander, I have a strong bond to nature. It's basically the only time I feel comfortable in myself. And I think it has such a healing power. And it's just very important to remember that. It's also one of the simplest ways to, to self-care, I think, is to, if you have the ability to be close to nature or to, read about nature or anything like that, I think it's why it's so important that we cherish what we have and use it in the best possible sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can touch upon that a little bit more in terms of our connections to nature, because I know it's something that we all feel very strongly about. But in terms of how you two came together, because you're obviously from very different backgrounds and have, different focal points probably within your careers, even though of course you have this shared passion for saving the environment and combating climate change. So what is Carbon X Regeneration, and what brought you guys together to work on that specifically?
I heard Alexander on the talk and I said, I want this guy. He has all the facts I need to know. He's got the brain. No, basically that's how it was. And I wrote to him on Instagram and we had a couple of calls and then we did a panel talk. And then we thought, hey, this is a really great way for us to ventilate, to, have these weekly calls, and let's make that, let's make something out of it. So we created Carbon X Regeneration, which is like an educational platform for companies or, private people to basically learn about climate change and, carbon, but also from like a total transparent, it's more like from a personal point of view than, let's say, from a brand point of view or like that. So I think we had one 8-week panel that was really, successful, and, so hopefully it's going to be, flourishing in the future.
Amazing. So, so I'm so excited to have you both together. I said in the introduction that, I've interviewed you both separately, and I feel like I'm just really excited to talk to you collectively. And with that being said, Alexander, I want to kind of knock it back to you, because I think Johanna and I were both very much drawn to this really in-depth knowledge that you have and this understanding of the mathematics and science behind the realities of climate change, and specifically when it comes to carbon. So, you talk a lot about the fact that, we've got we did have 10 years to reduce our emissions by 50%. We are just moving into a new year in 2022, and I have a sinking feeling that we are not even close to that. So can you sort of tell us just briefly, we'll get more into it as we go on, but what is the state of our carbon emissions and how far off or on target are we to sort of avert the worst of the climate crisis?
Yeah, so we are no longer on target, unfortunately. But so when we say carbon, we the three of us are referring to greenhouse gases, all greenhouse gases, but carbon is sort of like a shorthand for greenhouse gases. Some people use it to refer to just CO2, but importantly, when I always consider all greenhouse gases when I use the term. And so but by 2030, according to UNEP, and this is based on IPCC reports, that's an international panel on climate change, I believe, intergovernmental panel on climate change. But we're supposed to be hitting about 5 to 7% decreases year over year. We hit that last year, accidentally, not accidentally, but due to COVID. So it wasn't willfully, I suppose, but in reaction to COVID. And then this year, it should be bouncing back like about 5%, according to the global carbon budget. And you can look that up, global carbon budget, but we're pretty much almost back to where we were 2019 pre-COVID this year. And so we've lost some ground. We're not on target.
Right.
Unfortunately. But that's for the 1.5 degree target, and there are other targets. We could hit 1.75. We're not on target for that either, but we have a higher chance of hitting that eventually.
Great. Okay. So
I love a positive way.
Yeah. Oh God. Okay. All right. So basically, I think it's really interesting because when you say that we accidentally hit it due to COVID, Alexander, that literally meant, and again, we'll get more into the details later on, but I know when we had our podcast, it was, we were still sort of in lockdowns more. And so basically people stopped flying, manufacturing really came to not a halt, but substantially decreased. Basically, what are some of the things, if we're looking at lifestyle changes? Because I feel like whenever anybody hears this sort of news, there's like this automatic reaction of, God, this is awful, terrifying. But like, what are the lifestyle changes that, we as individuals can look at sort of right away to think about how we could, on an individual level, examine how we live our lives to be more in accordance with, decreasing carbon rather than having it shoot back up?
Yeah, I think that one thing that I like to point out with regard to the 2020, the COVID, the year that COVID started, and the year that we saw about a 5% decrease year over year. And it's important to note that about 90% of the world average 4 tons of greenhouse gas emissions per year. The top 90% average about 35. So the 5% global reduction in 2020 was primarily due to lifestyle adjustments by the top 10%, because the poorest 50%, for example, account for 10% of global emissions. So they didn't really change their lifestyles. The people that really changed their lifestyles were the people that fly 5-10 times a year. 1% of aviation passengers account for something like 0.5% of aviation emissions. So it's really like that, the small fraction of humanity that changed their lifestyles. And that was, a lot of it was like not flying, not driving around. So transportation reduced. Transportation accounts for anywhere from 2.5 to 5% of emissions, and so globally. And so those are some of the lifestyle adjustments. I think supply chain disruptions meant that people bought a little bit less that year, and so they produced less stuff. And so those lifestyle adjustments, I think, is what really is responsible for the 5% year over year. But it was primarily by Europeans and Americans, rich people in the world, which is really anyone that earns more than like $70,000 is like top 10%. So like it's not like the millionaires necessarily, but it's all of us. And I think that that's hopeful, because it means that what we did during COVID, we achieved way more than 5% individually. And so those lifestyle changes had a really big impact on our individual level emissions. And then globally, obviously it becomes, the change becomes less, not because we didn't have as big an impact, but just because there are so many people in the world and we emit a lot. But individually we achieved a lot during COVID. So
yeah. And it is true. And I think, Johanna, we were just talking about this before, and equally in our podcast, we spoke a lot about it, and I wanted to bring it back up today, was that, oftentimes it seems to me that some of the solutions to the climate crisis are really simple, like, connections to nature, like finding a place where you are happy and being happy to stay there more, not feeling this need to fly all over the world to, escape or have a holiday, or, go and eat like, unseasonal, exorbitant food. Like, and I think that's something that you show so beautifully on your Instagram, is that actually so much of like life's pleasures and happiness can come from actually just having a home, that you truly care about, or even if you're lucky enough to have a backyard, like a garden. And I'd love to talk to you, or have you speak a little bit about how the simplicity of life can sometimes actually really help with these massive, big issues around our carbon footprints.
Well, I'm a little bit older, so eventually, but I don't think it has to do anything really about my age. I always think this has been something that I felt, that the more I simplify my life, the less complicated it gets, but it's really hard to simplify. And I think it's also, we need to ask ourselves, why do we find the need to create escapism the whole time? It's coming as a yoga teacher, why do you need to run to escapism to become whole? Because basically what you're doing is becoming more fragmented. And, if you're going to make a lifestyle choice that's going to have like a huge impact, let's say on the environment, wouldn't you rather be totally in tune with what you're doing, so you know you're aware of that choice? I think that a lot of the choices people are making today is that they're not aware that, you know, let's say flying intercontinental has a huge impact. We still have influencers posting about, you know, trips to Thailand. I'm not saying that that is like, that's not the whole thing we need to focus on, but it's just like, it's really hard to, I think, for people to understand that these choices that they're making just like on the fly randomly out of awareness is something that's easy to adjust to another nice lifestyle choice that you can still do, maybe not as grand, but, you know, at home in your own backyard, you know, with people that you love, that will probably bring you as much fulfillment as, you know, let's say that fancy trip or, you know, that new car, whatever you need to acquire to think that you need that, you know, that kind of, you know, state of mind that you get from, you know, purchasing stuff. I made a lot of bad purchases and they always seemed really good, you know, when I did them, and they always left me feel really empty. And now, you know, when I'm 48, I have all this stuff and I don't even know what to do with it, because I don't really want to give it away and have it end up somewhere in Africa or in Chile. And I don't have the time to, like, you know, make a little collection and sew everything into something new. So it's basically, I become so aware that, you know, almost half a lifetime of like these random purchases that maybe made me feel happy for like 2 minutes are now stuck in storage and I don't really know what to do with it. And that also has a symbolism of a little bit how I feel inside. And sometimes, you know, when people talk about like climate anxiety or whatever anxiety you're feeling, I'm like, are you sure it's not the anxiety about all that stuff and the mental stuff that we acquire? And maybe that's what you also can start with, you know, treating. It's really hard to treat the big stuff, but sometimes like, are you sure that's not really, which is like maybe the seed problem of, you know, all these bigger problems that we have. So, and for me, the healing to that has been to scale down and, you know, but then again, I'm fortunate enough to have that possibility. But I think it's important to, when I work with spiritual practices these days, I rarely teach yoga. I do more creative practices, and I try to tell people that you want to move your head from your heart and out into your hands. And if that is with gardening or with, you know, smudge binding or, you know, whatever, if we're cooking or whatever, it's just like also to make your tasks into something healing. Like cooking for most people is a task. You know, we need to eat. It's boring. You used to do it stressful, but it can also be super healing if you set out that time, and that could, you know, make room for a whole other person to bloom, I think.
Yeah. Yes, 100%, you know, and I think it is really, you know, and I can speak to this a little bit now personally, you know, my husband and I, we just moved from the center of London to an old farmhouse in the main countryside. And what's so interesting is we were having this conversation last night where it's like, you know, our days are so different now. You know, we don't have like, you know, big fancy dinners out, and we're not planning, you know, a trip to Europe this summer, but, you know, we're able to, you know, go for walks in the woods. And we just started, you know, my husband just built a compost bin, and you know, we're going to try our hand at gardening, and I do have more time to cook. I'm making like 3 meals a day, and part of that is also just because literally the closest restaurant is like 30 minutes away and I'm not going. But it's like, but what's so funny is I think we were both quite anxious that this would be a huge adjustment and we'd be bored or we'd feel really like not satisfied coming from the city. And what's so funny is that I think both of us just feel this wonderful sense of connection to nature and connection to self, and we're finding so many more things that are invigorating and interesting to us. And you know, so I do think that lifestyle changes can be hugely important and wonderful, and I think that it's okay to step back from what we've taught is a version of success or glamorous living. Not to say it's easy, but I do think there's something to be said for that. And, you know, it made me think, Alexander, and we just briefly spoke about this before, and I just want you to bring it up quickly to our audience, which is, something that I've noticed so much is, now that we're in Maine and we're trying to eat with the seasons, I've noticed, particularly being here, if you are going to like your local farmers and stuff, we really are working from a smaller pool of things. But that's actually something amazing that I'm now really aware of in terms of like what is able to grow where we are. It's made me aware of just how much food is imported, because when I go to a big supermarket, I can see things coming from all over the world. And I remember in our podcast, you said that, if I was like, if you could tell everybody like one thing to focus on individually when it comes to climate change, you were like, I would say agriculture. Like, it's like, because it's something that we all have touch points to, and maybe that's changed because I think we spoke about a year ago, but I'd love for you to speak to this, because I do think that food, agriculture, all of this stuff, it's a great leveler, because here, at least in, where we all live in Europe and the United States, we're pretty much all having 3 meals a day. We're pretty much fortunate enough to do that. But can you speak a little bit about that before we move on to like, businesses and stuff, just whilst we're talking about individuals?
Yeah, I think that, food sustains us. It's we need to eat to survive. And so the food that we eat it originates from nature. It's grown off the land. You might have vertical farming, but vertical farming still needs nutrients that are supplied by nature to grow. And so connecting with your food is just, it's one of the closest direct connections we can have with nature. And so learning more about food, you'll learn more about seasonality, about how it grows, where it's grown. And then agriculture is globally, it accounts for a large fraction of emissions. In terms of our individual lifestyles in developed countries, it's not the biggest factor in our lifestyle carbon footprint, just because all the other things outweigh it. And so, but it is, I think that it's a very easy way to start learning about nature and to sort of start connecting with nature in a different way. And then what you are, what you eat, it also affects your mental states depending on what you eat, and pesticide and Roundup, learning about how to avoid that by eating organic food or other types of food. It also teaches you about the industrial sort of like complex or industrial agriculture and the way that society mass manufactures a lot of things. And so there's a lot to unpack in food, and we need to cook it every day or go out to a restaurant. But during COVID, I certainly cooked a lot more than I'd ever have. And so there's a lot of you also eat with people often, and so you can connect with other people. There's a lot of things around food that just it's a fun exercise. You can learn a lot and you can connect with people. And I think that when I was listening to Johanna, it was really I just thought that, yeah, the word connection is really wonderful. And I think that all the changes that we need to make over the next few decades, years, and 3 or 5 decades are going to require that we change our lifestyles. And it's not to say that, changing our lifestyles is enough. We need to manufacture more than 200 nuclear power plants a year to hit the zero emissions target by like 2050. If we want to hit that, at least 200. Just to put that into context, we're building 53 globally right now. We have 440 nuclear plants in the world that are currently in operation. We need to build more than 200 a year if we want to replace fossil fuels with nuclear energy. And so that's the scale of change that needs to happen. And so while we're doing that, we need to adjust our lifestyles, and then but we should be able to find meaning in that, and much more meaningful than like accumulating stuff, for example. And so I think those are some of the thoughts that came to my mind, but yeah.
It's cutting in because also to have that food and those basic needs that hopefully in the future all humans can have, we need that energy. It's that energy needs to go to create the stuff that we actually need, and not, all the stuff that we think we need. I think it's so hard these days to kind of go back even 50 years when we didn't buy clothes the whole time, and we didn't, you preserved your own food and you did all that, because we lost that connection. It's so hard, but because sometimes I think, I was going out to a party a couple of weeks ago. I'm like, I need a new dress. I do not need a new dress. Like I said, I have dresses in storage, but it's the instinct. And I'm not saying that goes away because you start to care about, climate. It's still there, and cutting into what Cora said, it's like, I can be in the city and I can get bored. I can be in the country and I can get bored, it doesn't matter. It's, you have to work with you and you have to work with that. So, and I think, but again, to go back, the energy, I think this is a thing when I talk to my friends, they don't understand, why do we need to consume less? I'm like, because basically the energy that we need to create all this thing, to create the new energy, it needs to go there. It doesn't need to go into a new pair of shoes or, a new car, or let's say, whatever, stuff is stuff. And when you tell them that's why we need to allocate the energy, then it becomes a different story. Because then I think people are afraid when we say we have to end consumption, because consumption is also associated with growth. So if we can talk about how we also need to address what we view as growth, financial growth, professional growth, because that is also something that we have cherished and treasured so much the last 100 years, maybe longer. But I think that's also why it's so hard for people to understand the action that needs to be taken, to achieve our goals, Yeah, sorry, just cutting in.
No, that's I completely agree. And I think that was perfect, Johanna, for setting me up for my next question, which is the question of companies, consumption, and it's something that I struggle with a lot. Obviously, Revolves is, I've made it so it's a 50% content and education platform, but 50% of what we do is sales. And, I always say that where I justify those sales is that the designers and brands that we work with, I believe, are putting all of this energy into creating a more viable, like environmentally and socially viable economy. And we can't end consumption overnight. It's never, that will never happen. And we do need jobs, we need people to be employed. I think there is a huge part of the human spirit that has to do with creativity and making things, and and beauty, and that's actually part of what makes us human, right? Like this appreciation of beauty and aesthetic and all of this stuff. So I hate to say that, that the making of things is inherently bad. It's just the way that we are making things for the most part now is so huge.
And the scale of it, it's like so much stuff.
But exactly. And, I know that you guys, for instance, work with companies and other entities. And so that is a question that I've got for you is, for businesses who are, I can't imagine like what it must feel like to be a business right now, knowing that you need to change, looking at your business model and being like, oh my God, there are so many things wrong here. We have hundreds of employees. We might have a board or investors that are not on board with, putting people and planet over profits. And then equally, we have an incredibly hostile environment on social media where if we make a misstep, we're penalized. All of that, which I empathize with, versus the companies who are greenwashing, not doing enough, simply putting profit over everything else at the expense of everything else. How do you guys look at companies and think we need to start making progress, not perfection, which is the topic of this talk? How do we hold companies to account whilst equally encouraging them to start moving? Because it feels like a really hard conundrum for me, and I'm not even in that position as a business owner.
Big topic. Do you want to start, Johanna?
Well, I mean, if we don't create platforms for alternatives that hopefully will become the norm, then people will keep on going, or consumers will keep on going back to the ones that are already there. I mean, we have to start somewhere. And you know, if I wanted perfection when I stood on my yoga mat, I would never do yoga. You know, it's just like one of those things. I kind of link spiritual practice to sustainability practice, because I think it's a work in progress and we can learn so much from the journey. With the brands and the environment that is out there, I think it's also important to kind of choose, you know, partnerships and you know, create the new kind of world that doesn't exist, and you know, work with people who actually want to do the work with you. And I think we focus so much on demonizing the bigger companies and you know, certain profiles or whatever, that it's almost that that's all the time we spend every day. That's all the energy we put in somewhere. And you know, I do that myself, but then I just have to brush it off and say, okay, I'm going to do what I can do, and I'm going to contribute to what I do. And, you know, I do a little influencing. And I think few influencers today know how corrupt that industry is, because most of them are pretty young. It is a really corrupt industry. But I've already created my platform. It's done. I've done the deed. The dirty deed is done. So I'm going to use it in the most, you know, contributing way that I can talk, you know, that I can use it for. And hopefully that will inspire, but I would probably get shit too, because I do work sometimes with companies that might not be, you know, deemed as really great, but I try really hard to choose brands and companies that I either believe in, or if they let me use my voice on their platforms, because then I have a bigger reach, you know? It's a use situation kind of a thing. And I think you just have to come to terms with a little bit personal growth. Like, you have to be responsible for your choices. And it's like, I do a moral inventory every once in a while to kind of see, okay, am I straying too much there? Should I do more here? And it's, like I said, it's a work in progress. No one is perfect. No one is asking you to be perfect. We're just asking you to act, you know, and also to learn by doing. You know, we have to make mistakes in order to make a change. That's, you know, I think that's really important to remember.
Absolutely. Alexander?
Yeah, there's you know, with companies and consumers, I see there's a large communication gap. There's also an education gap. You know, if many people don't understand energy or emissions, or where most emissions originate from, or what, at what point in the process of either producing or consuming a product are more emissions caused, and it changes, it varies. And so there's a lot of just ignorance, unfortunately, and it's because this hasn't been prioritized, and education systems haven't prioritized this. And so it's no one's fault, but it's problematic, because I think people try to simplify the problem, and it becomes too reductive, and they rely on this binary. A lot of people look for a binary sort of, what can I buy that's sustainable? And you're sort of like buying your way into sustainability, which is just not possible often. You know, just as an example, like, you know, like a t-shirt, half of the carbon emissions is in production, half of it is in the method I use to wash and dry it. Depending on where I live, the carbon intensity of electricity might be higher. Dryers are notoriously inefficient. And so if you just hang dry your garment, you'll usually reduce the carbon footprint 20%, depending on where you live again. But it's sort of like, that just shows that, okay, well, you could buy a sustainable t-shirt, but if you only use it 5 times, or if you and you don't make full use of it, then you haven't actually made a sustainable t-shirt out of what could have been a sustainable t-shirt. You've wasted it, you've consumed too much. Or if you don't manage it well, then you know, like I said, if you dry it and every time you use it, then you're going to have a much larger carbon footprint than you otherwise would have. And so that's hard to communicate for a brand. And then on the brand side, for companies especially, yeah, it's hard, because many companies, especially in fashion and apparel, and also in beauty brands, they don't own most aspects of their supply chain. They're not vertically integrated, and so they can't travel to Turkey or India or Brazil or America, even wherever their cotton is grown, if they're making cotton t-shirts, and sort of finance the capital equipment and provide the education necessary to help those farmers to do or cultivate organic cotton. You know, to teach them to not use fertilizer if they can avoid it, and then to teach them not to use pesticides. And so that is a capital investment and an education project that many companies can't undertake. And then you can say the same thing about many of the ingredients in beauty brands. And then do they control the distribution chain? Do they, as a beauty brand or as a fashion brand, can you dictate what type of renewable energy facilities, or whether or not renewables are even manufactured in the country of manufacture or in the origin cities? Difficult again, and like you can't, you know, those are all upstream scope 3 emissions if we want to talk carbon lingo, but those are hard for companies to undertake, and I think that consumers need to acknowledge that and recognize that, and then a lot of things need to come into place for companies to be able to make changes. You know, regulation would help. Don't know how quickly or when that's going to happen. Financing is necessary for it. Difficult to find sometimes. People are pressed during COVID, so they're all challenging. But at the end of the day, you know, we have no choice. We have to figure out a way to do it, and I think that if we're creative, we can do it.
Yeah.
And one thing is that consumers need to join companies, less sort of like, consumers need to do less of like, you should hold brands accountable, certainly, and you should reward brands that are being transparent, that are trying to decarbonize. And at the same time, you should also acknowledge that this is going to be a 30 to 50 year project. We're not going to find anything that's perfect today. And if you do, it's definitely not real. So it's like, don't look for perfection now, because, and if you do find it, like, it's definitely not real. And so, but sort of be realistic, and then take responsibility for what you can take responsibility for, and then hold companies accountable for what they should and can be held accountable for. But it's not sort of like, for each seller, there's a buyer. So this is not a sort of like, oh, it's their fault kind of thing. It's like, no, if you know, you really have to like own what you can. And I think that, yeah. Those are some of the ways that I like to think about it.
Yeah, and it's so funny that you say that, Alexander, because I had Nikolai Ruffstrup, who's the founder of Ghani, on the podcast last year, and I found him to be one of the most interesting conversations I'd had, because he was so incredibly transparent about the shortcomings in Ghani and the realities of you know, what they are going through as a company, trying to do their best in every way, but equally, you know, he's like, I would not call us a sustainable company. I'd really like to call us a transparent company. And, you know, we talked about the fact that they'd actually set up, you know, a whole Instagram account called Ghani Lab that basically puts all that information out there. And I was like, you know, how do you deal with that? Because there is, like, I was looking at it before we chatted, and I was like, you know, there is a lot of negative feedback on that Instagram platform. And he was like, well, he's like, I'm a realist, and it's the world that we live in that we're going to get negative feedback on social media. We just have to keep moving ahead, you know, and our decision as a company was that honesty and transparency would be what guided our sustainability policy. And that's what we're sticking to, whether or not other people believe it's right or wrong. And this isn't a debate to say whether or not Ghani is doing enough for a sustainable company. But what I will applaud is just that, like, he put a stake in the sand and had something to work towards, and has shared that journey, you know, with their, you know, audience. And I guess, what do you guys feel about transparency? And I think, like, a lot of brands don't have the courage to sort of do that, because there is so much vitriol on social media, and there has been so much backlash for companies over the last kind of year and a half over so many different things. And, you know, I believe that social media can be a really great force for good, but equally, I mean, I know that personally with Revolves, like, I am terrified to make a misstep that might be considered, you know, it almost kind of can stop you from saying things that you believe should be out there, because you're so scared of the response. And equally, that doesn't seem right either. So how do you guys feel about, you know, social media, public responses, and how companies can, you know, make a decision about how to work within the remits of this sort of crazy digital world we live in now.
You want to go? Or should
Sorry,
I can try a little bit. No, well, I mean, yeah. No, you.
Okay.
You're the expert. I installed Instagram last year, I think.
Yeah, Johanna, you go. You've got the beautiful platform.
Because I work with some of these brands, I think I get shit every day, from, you get, an H&M gets shit every day. We just have to keep on doing the work and not make it personal. If you have a mission and you have a vision that you want to share, then go ahead and do it. We're working in an industry that's questionable as it is, so I think it's important to just acknowledge that what we're discussing, I think mostly, and what gets a lot of heat on, let's say, Instagram, is that why are we even calling brands sustainable? We know, like, Alexander is no perfection. So it's not nothing wrong with sustainability per se. It's getting taken out of context so many times that it's like a really important cause is getting, watered down. But I still think it's, like I said, if we don't create alternatives, then we're never going to get anywhere. Like, we're not going to end consumption tomorrow. But we also have to have a bit of a thick skin, and the gloves need to come off, and we need to be honest. And also, I think whatever you have, like if Gani has like this Instagram account, that is great. Then they can learn from that. It might not be, a lot of things we learn in life is not nice, and it might be really painful, but I think it's a good cause. And then we don't even have to get into like if it's sustainable enough. I just think it's important that people are able to do the work. And I think it's also, when we're talking about like diversity in the industry, we also need to, this is also why I think it's important to maybe not focus on the brands that we already have and focus on the small businesses, because I think there's a lot of creative power, that needs to be heard with the people who might not have fitted in before, that can share so much now. And they are sitting on the knowledge that we need to go into the future. Hopefully, and I hope that they will stay within the small businesses and not, go with the bigger ones, because I think we need to kind of keep that intact in order to kind of shape the future. Because the rest of it's like I said, unless, the bigger brands file for moral bankruptcy and start over, they're not going to get to the point where we want to be. We need to have these smaller brands, and we need to catch the people working in these bigger brands to create something new, because there's a lot of innovation here. So, but I still think it's a very much work in progress. And, it's important not to listen to all the negativity. And, if you don't want to listen to the negativity, then get off Instagram, or stop having a business. It's like, come on, let's not be kids about it. But I understand it's really, it's a tough world, but look at the environment. I don't think nature is nature, is not laughing at what's going on in nature right now. Everyone is in pain. So why should our industry be spared for that, somehow? And I think it's important to remember that, like we brushed upon it before, nothing is perfect, but we need to start somewhere.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And I just want to pull that out. That was so beautifully said, that, if nature is in pain, why should we, the people inflicting that pain, be spared it ourselves?
No amount of CBD drops are going to save that. That's not
No, there's a reason none of us can sleep at night at the moment. And it's because there's like something much deeper going on than I think any of us even can really fathom. And Alexander, I think that makes me question the idea too of, I think a lot of people are like waiting and hopeful that regulation is going to come in. And again, going back to, I'm remembering now my conversation with Nikolai, and he was like, my God, I would love it if there was regulation in the fashion industry, because then we would have something that we were working to that someone else was telling us we had to do. Like, he's like, because right now as businesses, we are just coming up with it on our own. And he was like, I know this sounds really counterintuitive, but he was like, I would love it if there was government regulation or an entity that was regulating the fashion industry, because then it would at least level the playing field and give us all something that we absolutely had to work towards. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And how do you feel about the like, do you think we are going to have regulation? I mean, I know that you've sort of looked at a lot of policy and you're more well versed in this probably than most people I know. I mean, is that coming? Or, you know, I'm looking at, you know, we're both here in the States. I'm like, you know, we can't even tax Jeff Bezos. How the hell is there going to be any sort of regulation on industry that's tangible and meaningful? And maybe that's me being really jaundiced, but I do you think that's coming, or do you think companies have to do it on their own?
Probably they're going to have to lead it. I think most regulation responds to cultural shifts, or it's usually led by people. It's a response to what the people are demanding. That's at least in representative governments, and so regulation typically follows. And so, yeah, there are some examples, you know, Kyoto or the ozone hole. You know, there are examples where regulation was passed that did meet some urgent needs at the time that guided business. But the IPCC, I think, is in its 5th or 6th draft. They started in 1992. You know, carbon taxes. Books have been written about carbon taxing for decades now, I think. So regulation, unfortunately, is slow. I understand it's hard for businesses because businesses often the regulation will impact what decisions they can make in order to remain profitable. And so, yeah, it has implications. And so, if for example, if carbon isn't, if one company decides to price carbon and actually do something with that expense, maybe donate it away, or you're basically creating more expenses on your income statement that it's going to hurt your business. And if nobody else is incurring them, then like you're basically putting yourself at a disadvantage compared to other businesses. And especially like in fashion, they run on tight margins. So it's not something that's easy to do. It wouldn't even be possible for many companies. So I understand that they want regulation. That's one of the reasons why I like to focus with carbon calories on transparency and communication between consumers and producers, is that, you know, small businesses, first of all, can have a much closer relationship with their customers. And I think that is really, really important, because small businesses are leading most of the true innovation in the space in terms of decarbonizing or lowering the environmental impact of their production methods. And then consumers, objectively, if we're going to hit the targets, the number of nuclear facilities that we need to build, or the number of EV cars, there are 1 billion cars in the world. If you need to replace them with electric vehicles, EVs are much more carbon intensive to manufacture than regular cars. Like, you're going to need to replace a lot of cars. And if you want to replace, I don't know how many airplanes there are in the world. I can't really find a decent number. It might be 25,000. It might be 35,000. I don't know, but if you want to replace those, you need to manufacture. And so if we're going to do that, consumers need to consume less. Specifically, us rich people in Europe and America, we need to consume a lot less for at least the next 2 decades, realistically, if we're going to be able to allocate the fossil fuel capacity that's currently being spent to produce that stuff. We need to divert it to produce the nuclear, the solar, the stuff like that. And so, and the EVs, electrifying the grid, expanding the grid, all of the machines that currently burn fossil fuel need to be transformed or rebuilt so that they can run electricity from nuclear or solar. All of those capital equipment and infrastructure build outs and investments will require fossil fuel. And so we need to reduce consumption, especially in the next 2 decades, to allocate it towards those transformative build outs. And so going back to small businesses, how do we do that? We need to consume less. Okay, well, if we're consuming less, who's going to be hurt most? Probably large cap companies that rely on high volume sales, that are over levered, that have some fixed costs that they can't reduce. Like, it's going to be difficult for them to sell less because they already probably sell it cheap because they produce so much. Whereas a small brand, it's like, okay, well, here, the reason why we're charging twice as much for our apples is because we don't use any fertilizer, we hand pick them, we don't till. Apples is a bad example. You're not going to till apple trees or the land around apple trees, but you know, if you're doing asparagus is a perennial, so you have to do if you're doing no-till farming, you probably have to charge a little bit more because you're going to have lower yield potentially. If you're not using pesticides or if you're not using pesticides, you're going to have more crop loss due to just like flies or some bugs. And so all those things mean that you might have to charge a little bit more for your food, or for the t-shirt where you really get like organic cotton. It's sewn responsibly. You're paying people fair wages. You're using more expensive dyes maybe that aren't as damaging, or you're distributing it slightly more expensively. You might need to charge a little bit more for your garment. Or I was speaking with somebody, a founder yesterday, and she sews garments, and she says that we use much more when we make. I don't know the vernacular very well, but they said that when we stitch, we use significantly higher quality and different type of stitching. And so we actually use more material to prepare or to make the t-shirt, but it lasts much longer for that reason. And so consumers might need to pay more for a t-shirt than they otherwise thought they would, but it'll last much longer. And so I think that all works much better at a small business, at a local level. And I think that is the opportunity that small companies that are leading, not because they're necessarily sustainable now in 2022. No one is sustainable in 2022. Very few people, certainly not in the developed countries. But they, you know, the companies that are leading the transformation, they can communicate that to their customers, and they can say, hey, like, join us in this. You know, it's a 30 year project. Like, come get on the boat, like, join us. And meanwhile, pay a little bit more for this stuff. We're going to make it high quality. We're going to sell less because that supports you consuming less. And by you paying a little bit more, it supports us. And then, you know, in the long run, hopefully we'll have a currency that's backed by carbon, so we don't have to worry about all this like money printing. But that's a whole other thing. But I'm pretty sure that, yeah.
Well, and it's such an interesting point, and just, you know, going back to this idea of progress, not perfection, you know, and just, you know, how we have to spend more money. I mean, so my husband and I are looking at solar panels, and I mean, when we got the quote through, we were like, oh my God, it's just so expensive. And it's so horrible because it's really, it almost feels not doable. But then when, you know, we looked at the cost, but then the guy, like, you know, he gave us a number and we were like, oh my God. And then he sent through, you know, the proposal, but he'd broken down actually how much money we were going to save over time by investing in this now. And it's such a good analogy for, I think, like, where we are right now. It's like, if you are able, and I know that I am speaking from a place of privilege to be even able to consider installing solar panels in our house, but there you have it. And so I feel this extreme need to make sure that we are doing the right thing. And, you know, I think for us, it's like, okay, so we need to invest now in something that we might not see the benefits of for 15 years, but we can feel good about, you know, the energy that we are using and the progress that we are making and what we are setting up. And, you know, Alexander, I keep coming back to you because we do live in the country and we need a car. Like, there's just no getting around it. There's no public transport. We cannot walk an hour to the grocery store. And I remember, you know, in our podcast, you were like, you know, unless you're running an electric vehicle off of solar, it's almost as bad as just having like a gas car. So, you know, for us, it's like, okay, so we need the solar if we're going to have this electric car. And, you know, we know that electric cars take a ton of energy to make, but then equally, you know, they have such long warranties. I mean, my dad's looking at getting, because my poor father and mother, I have been on them so much since we got home, and you know, judging them mercilessly for their lifestyles. And so my dad's looking at that new Rivian electric truck, because my dad owns a landscaping company, so he needs a truck. And
Oh, cool.
and you know, he came out the other day and he's like, that car has a 30-year warranty. 30 years. Like, he was like, I've never seen a car have more than like a 5-year warranty. And basically I looked, and it is true, because they're like, we're backing this for, you know, people for that long. And I think it's sort of like, we have to stop thinking about these short-term things, and it's more about the long term, and it is maybe more of an investment. But it's the same way I feel about encouraging people to buy sustainably and support small businesses where they can, or organic farmers where they can, because if we are in a position to make these decisions, and like you so rightly say, Alexander, so much of the carbon footprints come from us in these developed countries, you know, we've got to do it. And it might not be perfect. You know, like you were saying, there are problems with electric cars, but you know, if you can do the best you can. So anyway, I've gone off on a total tangent, but it just makes me feel like, if you've got the resources and you've got the ability to do things differently, actually where it's really problematic is where people don't have, like, do have the resources and are choosing not to do it anyway. You know what I mean? Like, that always is like, that always to me is like, I think we all have to take a long, hard look in the mirror and see what we're able to do and what we're not able to do, and do everything that we can when we can. And I feel like why I'm saying all of this is that I'm looking so much at like big corporations, and, you know, particularly at the end of like COP26, where it felt like there was all of this momentum from these young people and these activists, and so little commitments from corporations and governments. Like, it felt to me this extremely stark contrast between this sort of younger generation and what they were fighting for, and these old corporations that were just not doing anything fast enough. And I guess if we're looking at companies, do you think there is a place for corporations within truly sustainable living? Or is it that we just have to like look at ourselves as individuals and small businesses and hope that like that's where the solution lies? Like, that's my big question, I guess, because it can seem like corporations just rule the world, and it would be stupid to think that we can go forward without them. But then equally, they're not really doing enough to be part of the conversation yet, is kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, it's hard to make an overall sort of like assessment of, are corporations good or bad. I think that we have a lot more power and influence over our lifestyle emissions and the impact that we have in the world than we recognize. And so if we're saying that companies are at fault, and that 100 companies cause almost all emissions, and therefore we need to target them, good luck. And so I think that sometimes people do that, and you're avoiding looking at yourself. You know, I can hang dry my t-shirts today. There, I've reduced the carbon intensity of my wardrobe by 20%. I did that today. And so there are plenty of things that you can do in your lifestyle and in your daily lives. And I think that I think that we really need to start there, and the world is not going to change because we necessarily regulated it, or because companies sort of like, oh, they all want to like join this boat. All of a sudden, they're all going to sort of, many companies literally can't sell less because they have to cover their debt obligations, and they need to hit year-over-year targets. But there are few consumers that will lead this. Most people, maybe a large group of people now are ready to change their lifestyles to lead this transformation. And then that, I think, will force companies to get on board, or to file Chapter 11 or get off. And then it'll force countries to pass legislation. But it really starts with the consumers. And I think that if that's a smaller fraction of consumers, I think that there is the larger fraction of consumers probably will follow. I think that some people aren't necessarily that opinionated. I think a lot of them, you know, what we're fed on Instagram and on TV tells us that we need to buy stuff, and it's made so easy for us to buy, you know, Amazon. I mean, not to like target them, but it's really easy to buy stuff in this country and in any country, in any developed country. And so I think that when people start leading it, and this doesn't need to be everyone, it's going to be a small fraction of people. I think that that really is what's going to shift the conversation. But yeah, you know, Exxon is going to keep on pumping oil if we keep on flying airplanes, if we keep on driving SUVs or driving cars, and if we keep on buying stuff, because stuff requires fossil fuel to manufacture often. And so I think that it's not as simple as saying, you know, that it's these companies' fault. It is, do we buy their stuff? Yeah, we buy their stuff. And can we live without a lot of, like we were talking earlier in the conversation, half of my wardrobe, like I put stuff in storage. I don't even know why I put it in storage. Have I itemized it? No. Do I know what's in it? Maybe half of it. You know, I have a lot of books in there. Why am I putting books in storage? Why don't I donate them to the library? Like, that's stupid. Get a Kindle and just like save myself the hassle. But I you know what I mean? I think that I'm getting on a bit of a tangent, but what we're talking about earlier was just changing our lifestyle and sort of finding meaning in consuming less. And I think that that is going to, I think a lot of the creativity that we haven't yet unlocked, and a lot of what we need to sort of like do to tackle these problems, we'll start unlocking when we start doing those things as individuals. And not like beyond sort of like, I don't use straws, so I don't really, that's not a problem for me. But you know, we need to move past sort of like having a reusable coffee cup and having a steel straw or whatever they do nowadays. Be like, okay, like great, objectively not going to change the world, but like take it, just keep on going. I'm not saying that that's bad, but like keep on going. Like, okay, start with a straw, start with a cup, you know, start with jeans, have a few t-shirts, like take it the next step, keep on going. Like you're on a roll, like keep on going. And we need to reduce emissions 50% by 2030. Keep on going, like get on that train, and then companies will respond, I think. So yeah, if anything, because we don't buy their stuff anymore, and they're gonna be like, okay, well, I guess we have to change.
Well, 100%. And you know, Johanna, kind of to kind of bring things to a close, I feel like, you know, like education and empowerment is something that is so important, and I feel like those are two things that you do in a really like beautiful way. You know, it's like and also leading by example. I think it's so funny, like my dad always says this to me. He's like, you're very rarely going to change anyone's mind with an argument, but when you lead by example, you know, it inspires people maybe to do better rather than making them feel, you know, antagonized or something like that. And again, I think that you do such a nice job of that. So, you know, going into this new year of 2022, I wanted to ask you, you know, how can people feel, you know, hopeful and proactive, and how do you sort of plan on going about things this year in a way that, you know, hopefully spreads that message in a really good way?
Well, I'm still doing yoga 22 years later, so I will keep on doing my sustainability practice, you know, every day. Like I do my yoga practice in different ways. And, you know, I think that's one thing that, you know, I channel so much of like just also how to keep sane in the world, you know, that I'm working in, by using my spiritual practice. Because I think basically any yoga analogy could be adapted to, you know, not if it's not like the activism itself, but just also about some kind of self-care. And, you know, as I've said, I've worked as a yoga teacher for many years, and I think it's important to kind of whatever you need to have in your life as a routine or ritual, you should find your key thing that you do, and you do it a little bit. Mm-hmm. And try to make it not a Saturday spree at, you know, whatever store. You know, there are so many things. And also it's easy to blame, you know, social media and the internet and, you know, everything. There's also so many talented people out there to channel. And you have YouTubes, you have lives. We have this beautiful Zoom that's going to come out soon. And, we have all this knowledge around us. So just grab, and maybe you don't want to do sourdough. Maybe you want to do something else, but just keep on going. Like Alexander said, it's like, it's almost spoiled to say that, if you want to be bored, it's healthy to be bored, but there's so many things to do out there. And I keep on educating myself in different ways. If it's sustainability, or this past 6 months, it's been about the lymph system, and everything's there online, and it's quite amazing that we have that. And so try to focus on something that will carry you through, and just keep on doing the work. We might not make the 1.5 degree, measurement that we need to do. We might not, but we still have to do the work. Greenland might melt. We still have to do the work. I think the problem is that we're so goal oriented. I'm going to do my handstand, I'm going to do my back bend, I'm going to, solve climate change, and then we don't do anything. Start with the little things, keep on going, like Alexander said. So I'm just going to keep on doing what I'm doing now. And on a personal note, I would like to focus more on my energy on maybe the sustainability aspects of the platforms that I'm working with Alexander, and because it takes a lot of energy to go backwards and forwards. But that's just that's a little dream. That's like an affirmation that I have for the future. So let's see if we can have this talk again in a year, and let's see where I am. But I just think the little things every day, try to make a chore, a ritual, and, keep on going. I think I've done it for quite some time now, and it's helped me a lot. And I hopefully it will, help other people as well.
Absolutely. I love that. And yeah, we do. It is very much that, like you said, we might not hit. It sounds like, unfortunately, Alexander, it doesn't sound very hopeful that we'll hit this 1.5 degree. We might not even hit 1.75. But for you going into 2022, you're so deep in the science, and I feel like the science is so depressing. I remember when the IPCC report came out a couple of months ago, and it, all you saw were headlines of Code Red for humanity, and what was so depressing about that, to me, actually, that was depressing. But what was more depressing was that every single government did not step up and say, right, okay, we are going to, you know what I mean? It hasn't been met, I think, with the urgency that it needs to. But given that you're so deep into these things and you have to be so aware of them, how are you moving into 2022, keeping this idea of proactivity and who you work with and encouraging them and hopefulness and progression? Like, how are you keeping all of those things in the forefront of your mind and your actions?
So I've been studying this for 10 years, really, like in depth. And so, there's every year, reports have been coming out for a long time saying that, maybe 2018 is the last year we had any ability to build fossil fuel infrastructure without sort of exceeding budget. And that's a lot of years ago. So those kind of reports come out. They're probably not wrong. They probably have some truth to them, many of them. It really, at the end of the day, I'm sort of like, yeah, are we on track to hit the 1.5 degree budget? No. Are we on track to hit the 1.75? Marginally. But, especially now, but it even 10 years ago, it was the case that we can't hit those targets without people making lifestyle adjustments. And right now, those lifestyle adjustments are the richest 10% of humanity, which is just about everyone in Europe and America. And there's income inequality within those countries. So on average, and then it's not going to happen until people make lifestyle adjustments and sort of, and really those transformations, if you want to call them that, or those movements, that is sort of that's a decision that people need to take. And as soon as they make that decision, and as soon as a group of people make that decision, we can move really quickly, So I'm optimistic about the fact that when we do get this movement, not just the movement that says this is a problem, and not just a movement that sort of like wants to hold companies accountable, and not just a movement that, you know, wants to, you know, regulation and businesses to change, or governments and businesses to change, but when people sort of, oh, I could do this today, I can have serious impact today, and I'm going to get a lot of people to do it, that things can move quickly. And so I'm hopeful about that. And at this point, it's not, we're not going to hit those targets if people don't engage in lifestyle adjustments realistically. Just we won't hit them, because we need to divert the fossil fuels to build renewable infrastructure, and we don't have that in the budget if people don't reduce consumption. And so, like, I'm optimistic about that. And so I'm all about catalyzing that kind of transformation. And then the one last thing I'll say is that, you know, a lot of these projections, they're probably not wrong. I mean, if you had studied the IPCC special report, I think it's called SR 1.5, you see that in their assumptions for the 1.5 degree target, they baked in a lot of nuclear power capacity build out, which has not happened. They've also baked in a lot of carbon capture technology, which objectively, and they write in the report, is unproven at scale and is speculative to rely on. And so even those reports they have some like pretty optimistic assumptions that are not realistic objectively in some people's eyes. And so even those reports, but the last thing I'll say, sorry, is that those reports and economists that make projections, they can never factor in like human will to sort of like really change. They don't factor in lifestyle adjustments. They hold constant that people are going to keep on consuming more. I'm like, why? Like, that doesn't need to be the case. And so all those projections, they rely on realistic economic behaviors by people. And I'm like, we've behaved very differently prior to modernity, and we can do that now. And so I think that, and maybe we would have consumed what we did prior to modernity if we had modern technology, but nowadays we can definitely change those projections, and that'll be because people make lifestyle adjustments and decide to educate themselves and change their lives. And it's not going to be because we built nuclear power, even though we need to do that too. But it'll be because people change their lives and their lifestyles and found meaning in it. I think that's really important, is that there's lots of meaning to be found in it. There's lots of connection to be had. There are lots of people that are educating themselves and that are making adjustments and that are putting 1 and 2 together and are sort of like, yeah, I'm going to take this on. And so that the more we get that going, and the more people that get on that train, that's the only way that I think we're going to actually catalyze any sort of serious change at regulatory levels or by businesses. It's when consumers really get on board and sort of like, okay, I'm going to take the bullet here in the next 2 decades and like know that I'm investing for the future by making these sacrifices. And so yeah, that's how I'm hopeful about 2022. And I'm starting an accelerator, so I'm super excited for carbon calories. Amazing. And we want lots of small businesses to get on board to start disclosing, because I think that really helps consumers to sort of like get excited, and brands to sort of get over this sort of like hump of, oh, are consumers going to give us backlash? Maybe some of them, but like in the long run, transparency, I think, helps. And so, at least you're not going to get everybody on the same page because there wasn't some back and forth discussion, maybe some disagreement, maybe some conflict, but it's like you're going to have to do that to get on the same page anyway. And so we got to start. And so that's really Johanna and I. We're working together on carbon calories too. Johanna is helping me to reach out to brands and sort of like get some of those early brands that are exploring doing this on board to start disclosing, because you know you have a lot of experience in the industry and working with brands, and so bringing them or encouraging them to sort of like do more real talk and not be as sort of like greenwashy or just, you know, be real with what they market. And so Yeah, that's what I'm excited about in 2022.
Yeah, I would say that if you have a smaller brand and if you're just starting out, like doing what, carbon calories, or if you choose, another platform, it will also help you to create an assortment with products or, clothes or whatever you're doing, that will be also able to be transparent for the future. Because when you're doing like the calculation, you learn how much carbon emissions are emitted in production and then also for customer use. So it will be easier for every product you do this for, because it will be easier to create the assortment that you want to have out there, so it's, I know we're going to have to cut this now, but it's just like one of those things that I think is important, that like that you learn so much by doing that, the calculation of one product, that it will help you. Every other product you make after that will become much easier to, think of, produce, sell, whatever. It's going to be just easier to tie an assortment together, whereas now it's all over the place. It's really hard to go back and just do one. But I think if you're starting out now, or if you still if you have those ideas, we don't want to put people off. Like I said, we want to create good alternatives, for next year and all the years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, gosh, guys, thank you so much. I will put all the information below on all of these amazing things that you're doing. So if you're an individual, if you're a small business, whoever you are, if you want to engage with what you guys are doing, I can't recommend it enough. I find you both so inspiring, and I had started the morning feeling really depressed, and now I feel a little bit more hopeful again. So thank you both, and keep on doing this incredible work, and I hope that everyone listening will follow along, because it's truly phenomenal. And so thank you so much for coming on and talking to us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.